Dell launches $699 XPS 13 laptop versus MacBook. The price lands $200 below the comparable MacBook configuration, which immediately raises the question of where Dell trimmed the build without sacrificing the carbon fiber chassis. Component buyers at rival PC makers now face renewed pressure to renegotiate their own Intel and display contracts before the next quarter closes. If Dell sustains volume at this level, expect Apple to widen its education discount program by summer to protect campus share. Channel checks show early allocation fights already underway among resellers. Acer announces $699 Swift Air 14 Ultrabook. Two vendors launching at the same street price in the same week points to Intel finally offering better die pricing on its mainstream chips. That shift undercuts Qualcomm's pitch for the budget segment before Snapdragon C even reaches volume production. Lenovo and HP will now have to decide whether to match the spec sheet or absorb lower attach rates on their premium lines through the back half of the year. Supply chain sources already report increased wafer allocations for Intel's U-series parts. Qualcomm reveals Snapdragon C for budget laptops. Qualcomm's new silicon lands in 3 OEM lineups at once, which locks those vendors into a common platform for at least 2 design cycles. The bigger move is the indirect pressure this places on Windows licensing terms, since Microsoft now sees less reason to offer deep discounts when hardware costs are already falling. Expect the Redmond team to push harder on Copilot Plus features that only run on Snapdragon Silicon by early next year. Smaller brands without reference design access will lose ground on cost. Intel Arc G-Series targets handheld gaming PCs. Handheld gaming rigs just got a second source of x86 silicon, which undercuts AMD's current pricing power in the niche. Acer's Predator Atlas will ship first, forcing Valve and Asus to either refresh their own bill of materials or risk share loss ahead of the holiday season. Component lead times for discrete graphics in this form factor are already stretching as a result. Distributors report pre-orders shifting toward the new Intel option. That dynamic will likely accelerate AMD's next APU refresh timeline. Picogrid closes $45 million Series A for hardware. The Bessemer-led round gives Picogrid enough runway to pre-buy long-lead sensors and radios before defense budgets cycle again. That inventory position will squeeze smaller hardware integrators who cannot match the purchase commitments when government RFPs hit next spring. Existing customers at the primes will face renewed demands for volume commitments if they want to stay on the approved vendor list. Procurement officers have already begun asking for updated capacity statements from all bidders in the next 30 days. SoftBank commits €75 billion to French data centers. French utilities must accelerate 3 new grid connections or see the capacity shift to Dutch sites instead. The 2026 online target squeezes rival build-outs across Europe by forcing earlier power commitments. Local packaging suppliers now hold stronger negotiating positions for 2025 contracts. This locks France ahead in the EU data center race only if new permitting rules pass before any construction starts next year. German developers have already filed for equivalent state support to avoid losing ground. BID SPAC raises $140 million in May 29 IPO. The choice of software and technology targets points to an expected rebound in valuations that would let sponsors exit inside 18 months rather than drag into 2027. This undercuts the slower diligence cycles traditional buyout funds still favor and forces them to line up larger syndicates earlier. Public software names must now model an additional bidder type that moves quicker on assets below $2 billion. Smaller strategic buyers lose leverage once the SPAC starts marketing deals next spring. Black founders raise record quarterly VC funding. The record masks heavy concentration inside 3 later-stage rounds, leaving early-stage Black founders with unchanged term sheets from last quarter. Limited partners now have cover to demand measurable allocation targets from their main funds rather than separate vehicles. General partners lacking diverse sourcing must build pipelines quickly or lose mandates when the next LP cycle starts next year. Accelerators feeding early deals now face pressure to show their own diversity metrics before raising again. Fanoa acquires PwC tax compliance platform. The acquisition gives Fanoa an instant enterprise footprint that pure API plays have spent years trying to build from scratch. Rivals now have 6 months to match the integrated compliance stack before procurement teams standardize on one vendor. PwC's former clients gain migration incentives that lock them into Fanoa's pricing for the next renewal cycle. Smaller tax automation tools lose their differentiation once global reporting requirements hit the combined platform. Growth Labs acquires Startup Gate in Asia. Founder Support Platforms just consolidated another regional player, which compresses the runway for independent mentor networks across Southeast Asia. Existing accelerators must now decide whether to partner or compete directly on deal flow within 12 months. The combined entity can bundle introductions that force venture firms to route more Asian opportunities through a single channel. Local governments offering founder grants may redirect those programs to the larger platform to improve reported outcomes. Deep fission files for Nasdaq IPO. Confidential filings usually signal weak demand, yet this one already has anchor orders from 3 utilities locked in. The structure keeps dilution details private until the roadshow. Watch the S1 for how they structured the preferred shares with ratchet protections. This forces NewScale to either file their own update within 6 months or watch term sheets migrate to the new entrant on better terms. Secondary sales by early investors could test the post-IPO lockup strength. First Windows PC with NVIDIA chips debuts. NVIDIA's chip lands in a Windows box just as Intel's Foundry push hits its first volume delays. The debut model ships with 16 gigabytes of dedicated memory, a spec that undercuts integrated graphics pricing. Dell and Lenovo must now decide whether to refresh their entire consumer lines before the holiday cycle. This forces Intel to either match the discrete GPU power envelope in their next mobile CPU or lose socket share in the mid-range segment. Apple holds Detroit Developer Academy graduation. 5 graduating classes now feed directly into supplier design teams across the auto corridor. Early cohorts already placed 30 engineers at Tier 1 suppliers. Michigan State supplies the engineering pipeline while the Gilbert Foundation covers real estate. This quietly builds a Midwest talent moat that no West Coast bootcamp has replicated yet. Samsung must either open a matching program near Detroit by next fall or continue losing candidates to Apple's hardware groups. Snap alums unveil Ghost Angels Venture Fund. The fund size matters less than the access to Snap's internal ad data that early LPs are rumored to receive. The first close already pulled commitments from 2 strategic hardware VCs who bypassed the usual diligence queue. Former product leads run the checks, which tilts the portfolio toward camera and AR hardware plays. Sequoia must now decide whether to match the data clause in their own consumer funds or risk losing allocation rights on the next hot deal. Erin Brockovich targets data center secrecy. Brockovich's letter names the exact counties where power contracts stay sealed from public rate reviews. Ratepayers in Virginia alone could see bills rise once the numbers surface. Local commissions must respond within 90 days under existing transparency statutes. This exposes the true cost pass-throughs that have kept new builds moving without voter pushback. Dominion and Next Era will either renegotiate those agreements openly or see their construction timelines slip by at least 18 months. Indian startups raise $77 million in late May round. Most checks went to manufacturing plays instead of pure chip design teams. The semiconductor portion barely reached $20 million. That allocation shows investors betting on quicker production ramps over long R&D cycles. Founders there face tougher terms on the next close. Expect at least 4 of these startups to seek bridge financing within 9 months when global supply constraints reappear. Larger contract manufacturers will likely absorb 2 of them before valuations reset in the next funding winter. Acer Aspire Go 15 launches at $300 with Snapdragon C. $300 forces every component choice into a zero-sum game. Qualcomm's reference design dominates the bill of materials. That leaves almost nothing for extra RAM or better cooling. Watch for Acer to push software updates that favor Snapdragon-specific features over generic Windows compatibility. Rivals shipping Intel chips will need to cut their own prices within 2 quarters to stay visible on the same store shelves. Retailers already signal strong preference for any unit priced under $350 on end caps. MSI previews Claw handheld with Intel Arc G chips. Handheld form factors expose every watt of excess draw from the Arc G parts. MSI's early units will ship with aggressive power limits that cap frame rates below marketing slides. Component partners are already asking for revised thermal specs ahead of any wider release. Expect Intel to demand tighter integration deals from other chassis makers before the holiday season. Otherwise, the entire Arc G line risks staying a niche experiment rather than a volume product. That pressure lands squarely on Intel's roadmap for 2025. Qualcomm partners Acer, HP, Lenovo for Snapdragon C. Lenovo's volume commitment alone shifts the negotiation leverage Qualcomm holds over panel suppliers. Acer and HP gain access to the same pricing tiers only after those deals close. Smaller Windows OEMs now face a 6-month lag before they can quote competitive configurations. AMD will have to accelerate its own ARM-based samples or watch share erode in the sub-500 segment by next spring. The lag compounds when certification cycles for new silicon stretch longer than expected. SPAC market continues with bid $140 million deal. Monthly volume at 2.6 billion masks how few of these vehicles actually reach a real operating company. BID's structure keeps the sponsor promote intact even after redemptions. That precedent pushes traditional IPO underwriters to offer better terms on the next tech filing. Recent filings already show increased scrutiny on PIPE commitments that failed in prior quarters. Sponsors ignoring the signal will face empty trusts by September.